This is VRR, and you are listening to the Virtual Robots Revolt podcast. Hello, and my name is Billy, and thanks for tuning into the podcast. On this podcast, I want to talk about everything from retro computers, current gen gaming systems, retro game systems, mods, hacks, repairs on lots of electronic stuff involving entertainment of some sort. Um, I hope all of you find that stuff interesting as well as or at least pretend to because you like me for some reason. In any case, welcome to my podcast, and I hope to continue recording these at the very least twice a month, if not more. So, what I've been up to recently is collecting vintage computers, specifically of the brand Apple. And before anybody goes and says, oh, well, how come you're not collecting for the Commodore or the old Compaqs or the IBMs, so on and so forth, I'll stop you right there and say, collecting old Apple computers is actually I don't know what I just said there, is actually one of the easier computers to collect for right now in terms of collecting older computers, unless you're talking about computers in the Windows XP era, then oh my God, those are everywhere. You can go to tons of places and still find Windows XP machines. And when I say Windows XP, I'm referring to like Dell towers, things of that nature, gateways. You can find those anywhere. You can find those in garage sales pretty dang easily. But when you're talking about computers from the 80s and even the early 90s, unless it's Apple, people usually threw that stuff away when they were done with it. I mean, I guess they're around a little bit, but for some reason, like if they are around, people just assume that people don't want them, and they're assuming correctly because I've actually also noticed there's really not much of a market out there for this stuff. There is um, on the internet, of course, on eBay, because it's a gathering of basically the collective buying group in the whole world, or at least in the more popular countries. So obviously, they'll all gather there, but if you actually break it down city by city, how many people are into collecting vintage computers these days, it is not much, believe me, not much at all. Um, and collecting Apple computers, if it's actually goes outside the realm of just collecting vintage computers. The reason why there's more Apple computers out there than like old IBMs and Commodores, things of that nature, is because there's a lot more just Apple fans in general that are just started becoming fans of the product ever since like one of the first iMacs or even the iPod or the iPhone. Hell, they even have like Apple TVs and you know those streaming boxes and stuff. Like some people just love the whole story of Steve Jobs and are collecting old Apple hardware just based on that. So there's multiple markets that an old Apple computer can fit into. There's the people who just love Steve Jobs. There's the people who just love the brand. You still see Apple all over the place in terms of the press. It's talked about constantly. They have dedicated Apple stores. I mean, it just fits a lot of collector markets. Um, and one of them is just, one of those markets that it fits in is collecting vintage computers. So that's basically why I've been able to find them more easier than other systems. Recently, I have been finding the Commodore computers more um, than I was before, but even then, the people that are holding on to that, there's not that much of them. I've seen more Apple computers come up in the market than Commodores recently, and then there's other older computers, and man, those are even more rare. You know, like if you're like trying to collect the Amiga in the United States, that's going to be pretty tough because that market is very, very small. But anyway, yeah, so some of the computers I've gotten recently, I have an Apple IIgs I'm looking at. I have two Apple IIes. I'm looking at a Mac SE 30, which I actually got that locally. An Apple II-C, which that one I did get on eBay. Um, so these are the ones I got on eBay. I got an Apple II-C on eBay, and these three Mac SEs on eBay. One of which doesn't work. The Apple, or not Apple, the Mac SE. But yeah, so that's basically my collection right now. Oh, and then I have an iMac G3, one of those all-in-one like or it's not multicolored, but it's translucent case. It's like an all-in-one computer. I got that locally as well. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with it, and I don't even technically, I don't use an Apple computer for my day job. I don't use one right now. I've been using PC basically my whole life, with the exception of school. I have used um, Apple computers in schools, and that's kind of where my love for Apple computers came from. Um, I'm not 100% sure which computers I was using in elementary school. One of my friends who I've known since the first grade, he claims that he's seen the Apple II GS in our schools before, but um, I'm not sure about that. I have a little bit of a hard time believing that, considering I've been messing around with this computer a bunch, and I don't remember having to use that much of a floppy drive before. And it seems like this is pretty floppy base driven. I mean, you can install a hard drive, but I'm not sure if they would have went through all that. I do remember seeing the Mac Color Classic at school once. Oh man, if I could only go back in time and offer up some money for that, because those are worth a little bit now. Um, one of it's the first compact Macintosh that was in color. Yeah, those are pretty valuable now. So I'm thinking we probably used like one of the earliest versions of the Macintosh in school. That's what I'm thinking we used then. But then when it came time to middle school, then they actually, and yeah, they probably had some of these in elementary school now I'm thinking about it, but in middle school they actually still had some Apple IIs out. Like I remember I used an Apple IIc in a class and a Apple IIe, and I played a bunch of games on them, Oregon Trail, and man, I had a lot of fun with that. And it's very hard to replicate that now and emulators. I mean, you can do it, but it's not the same. I'm very much about collecting for systems that had their own monitor, because you can emulate all sorts of things, you know, almost and pretty much perfectly too. Like hell, you can play Apple II games on your browser, your internet browser, for free easily. I want to say it's either virtualapple.com or apple2online.com. I'll put it in the show notes. But yeah, you can play Apple II games online for free. I even heard recently you can play DOS games online for free. But it's not the point. I want to play with the monochrome green and black monitor, which looks amazing to me. Even this RGB monitor for the Apple II GS, I mean, just the colors pop on it more than it would on a flat screen. And it's a whole different look and feel, a lot more nostalgic too. But yeah, I've been having a lot of fun with that. And oh yeah, so yeah, one more thing, and I'll go more into this at a later date. But one reason why I've loved collecting all of my Apple computers here, except for the iMac G3, that's different. But the Macs and the Apple IIs, I can get software from the internet. I can even upload software from my computers to my Dell PC over here, through this program called ADT Pro, which is Apple Disk Transfer Protocol, I believe is the acronym for it. And that was a software that was written, fairly recently, probably the last 5 years it was written. And man, if you buy a couple of cables to connect it from an Apple II to a modern day computer, man, it's a lot of fun. So I wouldn't even recommend buying software now unless you just want the manuals, because the software, if you try to buy the actual software now on eBay, you're pretty much rolling the dice on if it's going to work or not. I bought a sealed uh, floppy disk of like Star Wars the arcade for the Mac SE, and it didn't work. Or it slightly worked once and then it never worked again. But thankfully, actually, I was able to get a disk for that off RescueMyMac.com. He makes floppy disks and he sells them for like $10 a piece. So I got that off there, but now I could get it just through ADT Pro. because thankfully I have figured out how to get even old Mac software on there, not even just Apple II software. So I can download software onto 5 1/4 inch floppies or onto 3.5 inch floppy disks, and I can even upload them to my computer as well. Now, once they're on my computer, I can't really open them up and do much with them as terms of like copying and transferring. So can't exactly type up a report, and transfer it to Microsoft Word. It doesn't work that way. But I could technically transfer it to my computer and print it out. Um, I don't know. Uh, I heard there's another device called the floppy emu that you can plug in, and that apparently that's just a drag and drop system, which is way more simple. So if you just want something simple and easy to use, it's around $130 though. The floppy emu is the device for you. But yeah, I mean, it looks great though. I'll have to get it eventually because might want to use it as a hard drive in my Apple II GS. But yeah, have been having a lot of fun with these old computers. Looking at a whole bunch of my man cave right now. I actually took out the couch in my man cave. It's a pretty small man cave. It's just the size of a normal kid's bedroom basically, because that's what this used to be. Um, yeah, it's just the size of that. I took out the very, very comfortable leather couch and put in my office desk. Uh, also to work, of course, because where my desk was originally, that's now going to be the nursery for my second child, which is coming. Having a boy, having another boy. So now I have two boys. So I have one 2-year-old boy named Will, and I got another boy coming, and we're gonna name him Jack. So should be fun. Yeah, we'll see how that goes. It should be interesting trying to be a father to two kids. I'm not sure what I'm getting myself into here, but um, yeah, we'll see how it goes. It should be a lot of fun. But yeah, so that's where my desk used to be, is what is going to be his new room, and now I'm got the desk in here, and it's worked out great because on my desk right now, well, actually on a shelf right next to my desk, I have an Apple IIe, and then I have another Apple IIe on my desk. Then I have a monitor, just a 4x3 monitor. I need to get a 16:9, like a widescreen one, but had that monitor for work, a docking station for work, and a Mac SE 30 on top, which I have a whole bunch of capacitors sitting on top of it in a box because I need to recap this computer. I got this Mac SE 30, I kid you not, for $30, and it came with a mouse and keyboard locally because I went to this local computer shop. I want to say the computer shop, the sign outside just says computers. And let that be a lesson to you guys. Like, if you live in like a big area and there's a whole bunch of shops around that just say computers or internet something, go to these shops because they're all kind of different, unless it's a chain, of course, and you know what to expect of the chain. But I've gone into a couple of these local computer shops, and they have old computers in them, or at least somewhat old. And they didn't. This computer shop, they actually didn't have computers this old. They had ones going back to the iMac G3 I see right behind me, but they didn't have them this old. But since he's one of the only, quote unquote, like computer shops in town, um, somebody came in, was just like, "Hey, are you gonna want this?" And since I go in there all the time asking to see if, like, "Hey, do you have like an old SCSI drive?" Because he does have old accessories. I bought a whole bunch of 5 1/4 inch floppies from him. So I asked him like, "Hey, do you have any old computers?" And he's like, "Well, actually, this one guy's gonna bring one in sometime. I'll put your name down, for whenever he comes in, I'll sell to you." So thankfully I got it. I mean, the thing boots right up. The hard drive still works, which is crazy. Um, and basically the reason why I'm gonna recap it is because, well, the battery's dead. Um, that is part of the RAM or something. But even then, it was functioning fine without it. It's a little bit blurry on screen. So I'm thinking that is power related. And talking to the Facebook groups online, like Low End Mac and the Macintosh Enthusiasts group on Facebook, it seems to be like a consensus of, you really should be recapping these computers when you get them, if you notice anything differently. And the way I know that there was something a little bit off about it is because it should look just like my Mac SE's, but this should have just a lot more horsepower. And so that's how I know it probably needs an adjustment. But it's gonna take some work. But thankfully I've gotten a lot better in soldering recently. And it's gonna take a little bit of work, but it should be a lot of fun as well. I might need to buy a new soldering iron just for the job though, because kind of using a crappy soldering iron that doesn't have a temperature gauge on it, but it's worked for all the things I've done recently. I've repaired like a Dreamcast controller recently, and done a couple of Game Boy mods and an Atari Lynx mod, so as well as fixing power supplies on these Apple IIs, because the Apple II power supplies, they like to explode a little bit, or not explode, but smoke will actually come out of them. So if you get let this be a lesson to you guys. If you get an Apple II, you can plug it in and play on it, no problem. But if you see smoke coming out of it, definitely turn it off. And you might want to put the Apple II in the garage for a little bit because it's going to stink up your house. What that is this like Rifa capacitor. Two, it's like a 220 volts uh, uh, line on it or something. I can't remember the exact value, but this cap, it explodes on pretty much everyone after this long, and the computer actually runs perfectly fine without this capacitor. But I like to put it in because it just seems like it probably does need it. There's probably a good reason for it being there, but I've heard reports that people just took it out and just never put one in, and it works just fine. Somebody even was still using the computer and didn't even desolder the old one. They just waited for the smell to go away. Don't do that because that's going to harm other electronics going on in that power supply. Do not do that. Definitely at least get it out of there. It's your choice if you want to put a new capacitor in there. I recommend it because it's just, I would say it was like a 50-cent part, but if you go to mouser.com, it's like a $2 part basically. And yeah, I recommend putting in, I believe it's for like just noise suppression on it, whatever that means. But anyway, so basically all Apple IIs will need that cap basically fixed somehow. Because I was actually planning on selling my second Apple IIe because I already had one. I'm not that crazy. I already had one. I didn't plan on getting a new one, but one popped up for $80 and I just had to jump at it because it came with the monitor and everything, and a functioning floppy disk drive, which is great. I could sell that for 50 bucks easy on eBay if I wanted to. I'm not going to because I need it, but yeah, so once I fixed the cap out of that, I was going to resell it. Now I'm thinking I might just hold because it might be gaining some value. And I didn't think I had room for it before. When my desk wasn't in here, it was actually just sitting on the floor. Um, and I was like, oh yeah, I gotta get rid of this thing. But now it's actually in a spot where it's like it looks kind of nice there. But I don't really need it. But it is slightly different than my other Apple IIe. The one I had before has like black font on it. But the other Apple IIe that I got recently has like a vanilla cream colored font on it, on the keys itself. Also a computer craft sticker. I'm not sure what that's about. Maybe they serviced it at one point. Oh, and then I have this Apple II Plus. I don't even think I brought that up. I have an Apple II Plus, and there's a cool story behind that because that I got that for $100. I paid a little bit more, but that was before I found all these. That came with an Apple III monitor, which is a little bit more valuable because it can fit on an Apple III as well. I can go into that at a later date, but the Apple II Plus, it came before the Apple IIe, of course, so it's just more rare based on that. But also it came with these very expensive RAM cards inside, and one of them in particular is a transwarp card. And if you get into the Apple II collecting hobby, you'll start to notice these transwarp cards are some of the more sought after ones, and yeah, especially for the 2GS. But the ones for the Apple II are, uh, the regular Apple IIs. Those are pretty sought after as well. And just because you can basically go twice as fast in applications. If you're playing games, it's a little pointless because games you need to run at a slower speed usually most of the time. But if you're trying to do something else in it, like programming, which if you're into, I really need to get into that. I'm looking at a new Apple II users guide right here, and there's a lot of stuff in there I want to play around with. I recommend that for anybody collecting in the hobby, the new Apple II users guide. But anyway, the Transwarp card, it's very functional for people who want to do stuff other than just gaming on the Apple IIs. And I got it, and it's like $100 card. So if I wanted to, I could get all my money back and then some, and by just selling this very small, uh, expansion card that fits inside of it. And one of the beauties of the Apple II is, there's no screws. If you want to get inside this thing, it just pops. The lid just pops right off, kind of like a car, which is awesome. The Macs are a different story because Steve Jobs wanted a closed system because he believed the customer didn't know what they wanted, and that we should just tell them, or that he should just tell the customer what they want. And it turns out he's kind of right, but um, he is kind of right. But back then, computers was such a niche hobby. It was such a niche market at the time, and for how expensive those freaking things were, you know, they couldn't do that much. I mean, now like just like a netbook can do so much, and yeah, that's probably all you need. But back then, like what he wanted to sell us was just a two expansion card Apple II, and that was for just printer and a modem. So basically, if he had it his way, we wouldn't have had like a spreadsheet. We wouldn't have had the capability to run a spreadsheet program on an Apple II. And yeah, that doesn't matter for the home market, which is what he was thinking about, but of course that matters for the business market. And that's what basically sold the Apple II to all the businesses, that it could run that expansion. It had more than just two ports, so it could run the 80 column expansion card to run programs like VisiCalc, which sold the Apple II greatly. Um, but yeah, we can go more into that as well later date. But this is kind of just a pilot episode here. I just kind of went off on a tangent about something that's I've been very much interested in recently, and that's collecting retro computers. Um, I was actually planning on playing Horizon Zero Dawn tonight. Just picked that up, but that the TV's right behind me, so where I'm sitting in this room right now, I'm staring at four old Apple computers. So it really just got me in the Apple II and Mac spirit to talk about that today. But we can go more into other things at a later date. I plan on talking about, the debate between should you get a PS4 Pro or a Nintendo Switch, um, Game Boy, Sega Nomad, Atari Lynx mods, or any other mods that we want to talk about. Repairing the Sega Dreamcast, or even repairing the Nintendo. Uh, fixing old boom boxes from the 80s, and EverDrives. If anybody's heard of these flash carts for all these video game systems, hell, even for these flash carts, technically for the Apple IIs and the Macs. I mean, do we really need them, or do we just want to run the original software? I guess it's there's no wrong answer there. Um, but yeah, so thanks for listening in today, and yeah, thank you so much, and please stay tuned for the next episode. I plan on getting a lot better at this, maybe even upgrading my equipment. Right now, I'm using a microphone that I got for free from work, this Jabra headset that's usually used for just Skype, but I think it's working okay, but I might upgrade my microphone very soon, but didn't see the point for today. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you later. Thanks. Bye.